Welcome back to Emerald City Comicon and the live stage. I am Mike Avila with SYFY WIRE. Hello, everyone. Nice, nice. A couple cosplayers out there. Very nicely done out there. Very nicely done. Now we are joined by three comic creators living their best geek life because they've gotten to work in the X-Men universe. Let's say hello to writers Lonnie Nadler, Zach Thompson, and artist Todd Nauck.
Hello.
Happy Saturday, gentlemen.
It's going pretty good. Happy to be here. Emerald City is probably my favorite convention that we get to go to, so I look forward to it every year.
And you guys have a big thing to promote this time because you guys are knee-deep in the middle of a big X-Men event, the Age of X-Men.
That is very correct. Yeah, we are knee-deep in it.
It's a 6-month ongoing project with multiple miniseries, correct?
That is, yeah. It started with an alpha issue that began in January called Age of X-Men Alpha, very similar to Age of Apocalypse back in the day. And then it spins off into 6 separate miniseries that are on the shelves between February and July, and it ends with an Omega issue on July 17th. Is that correct?
Something like that.
Yeah, okay.
It's a lot to take in. But one thing that's very interesting that I don't think has ever been done in an X-Men story is it shows not a horrible alternate timeline with dystopia all over the place and Sentinels ruling the world, but this story is about what happens if the X-Men win, and happiness ensues. So what does happen when the X-Men win?
I mean, that's what the whole series is about. We did a lot of research going back to read some of the best X-Men events of the past, and a lot of them deal with these dark dystopias. And so we wanted to sort of pay homage to that, but also do something new that people hadn't seen before. And so it's the X-Men are revered, the entire world is mutants. They are no longer fighting for their rights because everything is perfect, but nothing is ever quite perfect. And so there's this underlying darkness beneath everything that slowly comes up as the series continues. And well, some days they're just sitting in their houses, painting and doing whatever they want to do as individuals. They also still have to be the X-Men, even though they don't necessarily want to be.
Who's the X-Men who likes to paint?
Colossus is a big...
Yeah, he's a huge painter.
The gentle giant. Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense. The darkness and despair kind of go hand in hand with the X-Men franchise. Todd, we've spoken before about, right here on the stage, about how much the X-Men means to you. And that's part of the appeal, that they've had these dark, dramatic stories with major consequence. Is it weird to think about the X-Men in a happy time?
To that level of happiness, sure. But one thing I liked about the X-Men is that they would be, fighting off marauders or sentinels or, humankind who hates and fears them, but they'd also take time to play baseball on the school campus. They had these ups and downs. It was all over the map. It was never just kind of chill. It was either good times, oh my gosh, hold on, we can't finish this inning, sentinels are attacking.
Guys, talk about Nate Gray and his role in this whole event, because he's kind of the central figure here.
Yeah, so I feel like most people don't know who Nate Gray is. He was a character called X-Man who was created for Age of Apocalypse way back in the day in 1994. And Lonnie and I have been obsessed with him since 1994. I think when we first came to Marvel, we were like, we want to bring Nate Gray back. And they were like, no one wants that. That's never going to happen. And here we are a year and a half later, and we've built an event around him. He is essentially the most powerful mutant in existence. He can basically rewrite reality with the flick of a hand, and it's very difficult to kind of figure out what to do with a character that powerful. So he came back in the most recent Uncanny X-Men Disassembled storyline as a villain who was trying to make the world a better place. And he failed spectacularly. I'm sorry to spoil that for all of you. And Age of X-Men is the result. And what that is Nate is the ultimate outsider from a band of outsiders. He is too powerful, he is misunderstood, and he has always been looking at the X-Men from the outside, and has never really been welcomed in a proper way. So he really believes he has a vision for what he can do, but he's a young guy with ultimate power. He's the son, kind of Jean Grey and Scott Summers.
He's made from their DNA.
Yeah, and an alternate future. It's nice and easy to understand.
He's kind of, and then you guys just lay out the the ridiculousness with which how he was created.
With X-Men, everything is true, but the reverse of it is also true. So it's really fun to try and...
Comic book procreation, there's nothing like it.
Yeah, Nate is especially complicated.
The X-Men, I'm assuming, present a number of unique challenges to any creators who step into that world. Because one, there's the pressure.
Yeah.
They're always one of the Marvel top sellers. So you got that pressure, but you've also got the pressure of trying to figure out what the heck is going on because there's so many different timelines and so many characters. To all three of you, like the first time you guys were approached on doing X-Men books, do the editors help you kind of, figure out, okay, this is what's going on right now. Where is your story going to go? It's going to go in here.
No.
No, I mean, like, we had like 1,000-foot view of it where it was like, hey, there's a lot going on. Do you guys want to get involved in that, or do you want to do a separate thing where none of it ties in? And we're like, yeah, we'll do that second thing because X-Men continuity is very difficult simply because there's so much time travel, there's so much retcon, and it's like, it kind of makes it charming in its own way, but trying to keep up with it, like we've tried to read 30 years of X-Men history, and it's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's the
I love
ultimate
it.
melodrama between families and lineage and stuff. And when we were brought on for Age of X-Men, it was like, hey, do you want to write Age of X-Men? And we were like, sure. And they were like, great, you get to figure all of it out because we don't know anything about it. And we were like, okay.
Todd, when you first worked on the X-Men, it was the Nightcrawler series?
Nightcrawler series. I did the Nightcrawler solo series with writer Chris Claremont, the guy who wrote all the biggest X-Men stories that
He's
shaped so
Mr.
much.
X-Man.
Who shaped
He's X-Man.
all the the X-Men corner of the universe. And so my story, the Nightcrawler series was Nightcrawler coming back from the dead and getting reacquainted with the Marvel Universe. So it had ties to the current X-Men titles, but we had a lot of free reign on just letting Nightcrawler explore the Marvel Universe that he had missed out on during the time he was dead.
So you had to deal with the continuity issues. You didn't have the luxury of being able to say, this is just going to be, a what if story or something.
He's come back and now it's the Jean Grey school, and Cyclops has gone, has become a terrorist and stuff like that. So he's kind of getting reacquainted with everything, but we also got to really just kind of let him have his own adventures. So we kind of got to ride the seesaw of dealing with what's going on, but Chris and I are like, let's go do something really fun, and let's have him fight the Shadow King. Here we go.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining whoever the X-Men editor is at a certain point in time has some like magic board on at his office. Okay, this is where this goes. Okay, Apocalypse with lines and
It's all just stored in their brains.
cable somewhere.
Yeah. It's all up here for everyone.
No,
we
come
do
on.
have spreadsheets and everything for Age of X-Men where we're just like, where is everyone? Like a Google sheet that's just like all the character names, where they are, what happens to them in each issue, and we're like, that's the only way my brain can understand how to function with like what do we have, like 70 odd
70
characters?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
There's got to be more than 70.
well,
Just
there
in the
is,
Age
but
of
there's
X-Men.
70 in our universe that we get to
Oh,
play
that's
with.
it.
Yeah.
You just use
Just 70. Yeah.
Just 70.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's
Small
pretty weak.
sandbox, yeah.
That's pretty weak. Let's talk about the Summers family because it's very much like the Skywalker family in the Star Wars universe. Everything kind of revolves. Over the years, it's kind of become a saga that somehow ties into the Summers family. How important is that for you guys? And is that kind of almost a crutch or a hindrance sometimes to have such a dependence on a certain family of characters?
I think it's a bit of everything. It just depends how you look at it because it is so incredibly complex. And the X-Men, you're right, have sort of revolved around this Summers Gray family history for years. But it's something that Zach and I at least try to embrace in our work. And like I said before, it's this ultimate melodrama. It's a soap opera, but with superheroes, and embracing that and really finding, between people and their relationships and how it affects them in their job and how it affects them when they're being the X-Men is really interesting to us because it's on a personal level. While they're doing these ultimate massive scale stuff, there's still family drama there, and I think that's what audiences connect to and it's what we connect to. So we really try to go into that stuff, and because it's the most relatable, I think, for everyone.
Yeah, it's all about trying to find the emotional heart amid all of this. And like some of our favorite stuff that we've ever wrote. We started writing Cable, who's the son of Gene and Scott, and we did a whole issue that was set where Cable's like an 8-year-old boy. And if we had our way, we would have wrote our whole series as Cable as an 8-year-old boy, just being raised by Scott and Gene, because we just love that stuff of that like family drama of this like super powerful mutant child who could kill everyone, but is also infected with a virus that's killing him. And how do you raise a kid who's like, oh, you could become the mutant messiah, but also you have a techno-organic virus that's threatening to kill you and all of us. So that's chill and
he's
fun.
also just at the same time dealing with the struggles of being a 10-year-old boy.
Yeah, yeah.
He just wants friends. He wants to go hang out, but he can't do that because he's a crazy, powerful mutant at the same time. So,
What are your thoughts on the Summers family and its role in the X-Men universe?
I'd like to go to that family reunion. You know, people from different dimensions, different timelines. It's like, yeah, I think Lonnie and Zach put it really succinctly. I think I'm on board with all that.
Scott is a fascinating character because for so many years he was the leader and the heart and soul, and then over the years he's evolved, and some writers have kind of turned him into a villain and really taken him in different dark places. What is it about Scott Summers that makes him such an interesting character to tackle as a writer and as an artist?
I think there's rarely an opportunity to take characters like that in really new, interesting directions. And Scott feels like a real human being who, in the face of all of the stuff that mutant kind went through, you can see him becoming disillusioned. He was this Boy Scout, right, who was like committed to the cause. And I think any one of us who sees someone who's like a career sort of like freedom fighter, if you looked at all the stuff that they went through, of course you'd become disillusioned. Of course you'd be like, I need to go further, I need to go harder. And it's so cool to see a character like that go through that sort of transformation, but still have some redeemable qualities that you can't help but love, and you can kind of understand what brought him to that point. I think we're in an interesting place right now because he's kind of like wavering between those two sorts of destinies, and we're not really sure where he's gonna go now. And I love that. It makes him very unpredictable, and because these characters do kind of eventually get reset to a status quo that's very comfortable, and we're like, you know, we all know Cyclops will be a Boy Scout once again somewhere down the line, but the idea that the question remains now as part of his character, where it's like he could go either way at any time. I love that. That's what makes writing Magneto so interesting, because he's been the ultimate villain, but sometimes he's not. Sometimes he's right. And that makes him so much more interesting in a scene where you're like, I don't know which way this is gonna go.
How about Cyclops' costumes?
Oh, no.
He's also had some of the coolest looks in the series. The original costume was fine, but then Dave Cockrum really redesigned it. It was perfect. Then you had the Jim Lee 90s version, right? Maybe the coolest uniform of the 90s.
I'm a big 90s guy.
yeah.
If we're being
Jim Lee
honest, it's
stuff.
probably the cool. However you felt about Cyclops, Jim Lee Cyclops was pretty damn cool.
Yeah, I will always go back to that. The blue and yellow spandex it's just been burned into my mind from when I was a
The
child.
totally impractical
Exactly.
straps here and there.
Makes no sense, but as a kid, I was just like, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life, and it still is to this day. So yeah, that Jim Lee redesign is like the like platonic ideal in my mind of who.
I know you were a big image guy, Todd, so I'm imagining that was also an important costume look for you when you were reading the X-Men.
Oh yeah, the 90s was all about belts and pouches, you know, superfluous just anywhere. So that was definitely it when those designs came out. But I also love the 80s stuff. I loved how X-Men, especially in the 80s, tapped into the 80s fashions. Kitty Pryde, Rogue, Rachel Gray, or Rachel Summers at the time, all had kind of like a punk feel. Storm, when Storm became Mohawk Storm, that's like my favorite look for Storm, when she became leader of the
Let's
Morlock.
not overlook another important 80s X-Men character who you were paying tribute
Oh
to
yeah,
there.
yeah. People call out my gray streak. They call it my rogue streak. So it's like I got to do a gender bend rogue or brogue cosplay here. So 1985 X-Men. That's my teenage year X-Men.
With the double belt.
Double
Way-
belts. Oh
way to
yeah,
commit,
you know.
way to commit.
So it's my casual rogue cosplay. Absolutely.
All three of you are fans of the X-Men from way back, but in different eras. Tell us what made you fans of the mutants. Todd, I know you got an unorthodox introduction into the X-Men.
Yeah, so as an 80s kid, pretty much I was Will Byers from Stranger Things. Same age, same year, all that. My introduction to the X-Men was the Amazing Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon. They had 3 X-Men episodes, and that blew my mind. It's like, I've never seen this metal dude and the Australian guy with claws. Did not know that Wolverine was supposed to be Canadian. Laser Eye Guy. It's like, I love Laser Eye Guy. I got to know more about these characters. So that sent me to the comic books. That's like, I got to go to the source material if I want to know more about these characters. So 1984 is when I started reading X-Men, just prior to the trial of Magneto, when he became the new headmaster of the school. And I'm like, wait, what? I know Magneto's supposed to be a bad guy because Spider-Man fought him, and now he's in charge of all the X-Men and New Mutants? Blew my mind. And it's like, I was in. I was fully in. 1984, that's my X-Men, then on up.
I remember the Trial of Magneto issue, John Romita Jr.
Yeah,
with all
issue
the
200,
characters.
yeah.
It was massive. It was awesome. When did you guys become X fans?
I'm a 90s kid, so I grew up watching the cartoon, and I was like obsessed with it. I would spend my days after school like pretending I was Wolverine running around my house. And I had a corner store. Well, this is when they still sold comics in corner stores, and every week I would get to go and I would buy an X-Men issue. I had no idea you were supposed to read them in sequence, so I wasn't getting.
You just grabbed a random one off
You're
the
not
rack?
supposed
Yeah,
to.
I
It
was just like,
doesn't matter.
oh, Nightcrawler's on the cover of this one, so I'm gonna buy it. And then the next week, that was like I would buy Excalibur, and then the next week I would buy like Uncanny, and I would be like, these stories don't make sense together. I don't understand it, but I get to see the costumes that I like. And then it wasn't until later that I understood.
Especially in the 90s. If you picked issues out randomly in the 90s, you had no idea what was going on. Like, no idea.
Yeah, I started reading in Age of Apocalypse. My older brother gave me issues of Generation Next, and I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I love it. I love Colossus's like headband that his eyes just somehow come through.
He's got the Ninja Turtles
Yeah,
do-rag
exactly.
on.
Yeah. And like I didn't know what was going on, but I just thought it was so like undeniably fascinating that there was like this alternate version of all these like really these characters I loved from the cartoon. And I was like, I don't know what's going on here, but I want to know more of it. And just fell in hard on random back issues that made no sense to me for a very long time.
That's kind of the fun of like us, reading comics is we could get them wherever we could get them.
Yeah.
And reading them out of order and just by getting them for the sheer love or interest in the characters, we got to play detectives to find out how do I fit this whole story together. It made collecting fun because it's like I need to find that certain issue because the editor note in this one issue of X-Men says I need that issue to understand this part of the story. Made it a fun kind of treasure hunt. It's like you're an Indiana Jones and a detective at the same time.
Yeah, I used to love those little notes in the comics where they put editor's note at
Yeah.
issue 146 or whatever.
See the Death of Phoenix, issue 135. It's like, oh my gosh, I gotta go get that.
You got that like murder wall in your house where you're like drawing string between the issues, being like,
Yeah.
all right, how do I do this?
I
A lot of
used to-
Jean Grey and Scott Summers on that. A lot of strings, unfortunately.
I used to like fill stuff in. I was big into action figures, and this was when they were printing like an insane amount of X-Men action figures, and I would legitimately like fill in the gaps between issues with the toys because I would just sit in my room and play with them and tell stories to myself and to my sister, and who knew that would lead here someday? But because I was reading them out of sequence, that's what I had to do to get.
Who was the
story.
leader of the toy X-Men group in your room?
I literally had like 10 different versions
It was
of
X-Men
Wolverine.
for sure.
And I had a Nate Gray toy that I was like obsessed with, and that's who I played with.
I don't even remember what the Nick Gray toy looks like.
I actually thought it was Cyclops when I bought it because their uniforms were so similar. And then like a couple years later, my brother had issue #1 of the X-Men series, and I was like, this isn't Cyclops? My world is changing right now.
You know,
then
it's
here
so
I am.
funny how different people pick up the X-Men for different reasons, different eras. And you guys are part of that generation that probably discovered the X-Men through the cartoon as much as anything else, despite the fact that back then, the X-Men books were selling massive amounts of copies, right? It's kind of crazy because it shows you how good that cartoon was because they were so faithful to the source material. Like I remember thinking, when they adapted the Sentinel storylines and whatever, I was like stunned that they actually lifted certain panels and the story right from the comics, because usually they just abandon it. And it's no, they followed it straight through. I was like, yes.
That's how I got my education in X-Men continuity, which might be sacrilege, but like that, I went back and reread stuff after because I was like, oh, I only know the cartoon version of this story. And it was so foundational. And it's so interesting to me that they literally adapted comic book plots because that doesn't happen anymore. And it was like almost like a 1-for-1. And like, the acting is terrible and the animation is like, but like when I was a kid, it changed the way I looked at cartoons, and it really put me on this path. But it's interesting because we're writing characters sometimes that are like double our age. Even Cable, who was made in like '86, is older than both of us. And it's so weird to write a character that you're like, he's older than me. I guess we'll try and figure it out.
The one detriment to having picked up the X-Men from the cartoons is you probably always defer to the pompous beast character in the cartoon. Boy, it was Hank McCoy, serious and full of himself in the cartoon. He was the one that I was just like, I can't with you, Beast, I can't. Because remember, back in the day, remember, the Beast was much more boisterous, much more fun. And then all of a sudden, when he went back to the X-Men, all of a sudden he put on his serious hat. And boy, the cartoon really ran with it.
Oh yeah, he's just full-on scientist, smart guy.
He's an exposition machine.
Hello. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that call, that day when Marvel gets on the phone and calls you and says, hey, we like your idea. Let's get you on an X book. How did that go?
Oh man, so we wrote an indie comic book called The Dregs that was about a homeless detective in Vancouver, British Columbia. And we were like, this book exists for no one. There's no audience for this. And then it came out, and we were at our day job, and we got a phone call from the editor-in-chief of Marvel, and was like, hey, is this Zach and Lonnie? And my leg is like going like this, and I'm like, why are we on the phone with the editor-in-chief of Marvel? He's like, I read your indie book. I want you guys to come do something. What do you guys want?
Was it Axel?
It was Axel Alonso, yeah. And he was like, what do you guys want to do? And we're like, we love the X-Men. He's like, cool, do you guys want to pitch on Legion? And we're like, oh, I didn't know that was an option. Okay, yeah, let's do that. And so we did, and it didn't really lead to, Peter Milligan took that book, but it got them thinking about us being like, we tried to do something like really crazy, really ambitious, and it took a couple months to kind of find the right project for us, but then Cable came along, and they're like, hey, we have 5 issues of Cable, do you guys want to do it? And we're like, oh, cool, a time-traveling mutant character that is very complicated. And they're like, yeah, and you have to figure it out in 2 weeks. And we're like, all right, that's what we're gonna do. And so when Marvel calls, you got to dunk it. And so we went hard, and we tried our best to just give them something that was like, our Cable run is kind of a celebration of the character where you don't actually need to know who he is to enjoy reading the story, because we wanted to be accessible. And in doing so, they kind of were like, oh, we can trust you guys. And so they called us a little bit later to do Age of X-Men.
The interesting thing about Cable is he's amazing to draw. I'm sure for artists, he's a very entertaining character to draw because he's got such a perfect look. I mean, Rob Liefeld designed such a great character there visually, but he doesn't have that defining story. Most of the other major X-Men have defining stories and roles in everything from Days of Future Past to Kitty's story in X-Men 143 and yada, yada, yada. Cable doesn't have that one trade when people say, what's the defining Cable story? Did that make it easier for you guys to come up with a pitch for him?
Yes and no, is because we wanted to try to do that as best we could to make a definitive Cable story that when people are interested in the character and want to know more about him, it's like, this is the book you go to for that. So it was really daunting because Cable's been in so many books, and he was from New Mutants to then his own series and stuff. So we did a lot of research and tried to make something that was valuable and stuff that people who love the character would appreciate, but people who don't know anything about him can read at the same time. So I don't know if we accomplished it, but we tried.
Time will tell.
Have you ever worked on an next book with Cable?
No, I have not yet, but I'd love to sometime. Absolutely, he is fun to draw because he's got that big metal arm, big space-age guns, buckles and pouches and belts. He can't let him go. So yeah, he's definitely
good
a
alliteration.
Visual. I miss the one thing I loved about Cable, and I miss it, is he had the black streaks in his hair. And those kind of faded out like in the first few years. But whenever I draw Cable, I always want to put those black streaks in, because I remember as a kid, as a teenager, Rob Liefeld coming onto New Mutants and seeing Cable in the Marvel Age magazine, Mutant sketchbook. I was like, who's this dude? Commander X was his original possible name. Commander
yeah,
X?
yeah.
That sounds awesome. Cable? Still awesome. And it's like, and I just love they had those black streaks in his hair and that receding hairline just because it made him look so different. And I miss that.
And then you ended up working at Liefeld Studio.
Yes, yes.
I mean, Cable's dad gave him his big break in
Yes.
comics.
Back in '94, back when y'all just started reading the comics, that's when I was starting my career.
Has Cable's breakout performance by Josh Brolin in Deadpool 2 made your family members and friends more impressed that you actually wrote Cable?
Absolutely.
The only thing that's made them
Yeah,
impressed.
literally the only thing. I remember calling my dad. I was like, I'm writing Cable. He was like, who? And I was like, Cable, like Nathan
Cyclops
Christopher,
and
Nathan
Blank
Summers.
Summers.
Yeah.
Didn't register at
And
all?
I was like, Josh Brolin's playing him in a movie. He was like, I love Josh Brolin. I was like, well, okay. There
Everyone's
we go.
interest is just like glossed over eyes, and they're like, he's in a movie, and people are like, oh, really? Now I care. And you're like, oh, awesome. Yeah, it's interesting though, because it's like you'd think that would influence what you do in the comics more, but it doesn't really. Like, we didn't really ever get any pushback about what we wanted to do in a way that was like make it closer to Brolin's film version. So it was just like, hey, all we want you to do is do a classic sort of Cable story that's accessible for people who will see him in this movie. But it was never like, oh, they did subtle things. Like, we got the art back and it was like his hair was like the Josh Brolin like high fade, and we're like, okay, that's a good concession. We'll take it. He looks good with a fade, so whatever. But like,
Yeah, that was one change. That was one subtle change in the movie from the way he's been traditionally portrayed in the comics.
yeah, and like he's got a magnetic gun that he can like suck back with, which is like a weird thing. But I'm kind of like, I'm into it. I was like, why didn't we put that in our shit?
Yeah, we blew it.
Let's talk about the process for writing X-Men, because it's great that you come with all the knowledge and the passion. They want you to bring your own spin to it, but there are guardrails, because these are characters that do not belong to you. You get to play in that sandbox for a while. So how is it like? You say you have 70 plus characters in Age of X-Men. Did you want 100? And they said, well, you can't really use these. How does that go? How do the discussions go once you get into the nitty gritty details of the story with the editors and the other folks at Marvel? How does that process go?
In terms of like their
In terms of like,
voice,
do you get told, yeah, you can't really use him this way. You got to leave this character out because we have other plans.
It's actually like we were worried it was going to be difficult to nail all these character voices, and we were kind of like, oh man, like we've never written Storm before, we've never written Magneto, like we really don't want to mess it up. And we did our research and stuff, but it's this kind of thing like we're talking about. We've been watching these characters and reading these characters since we were 5-6 years old, and when we sat down to write it, it just sort of came out naturally, where it was like, oh, we've known Magneto our entire life. Like, of course we can do his voice, and it's, or you write a line and it's like, well, Magneto wouldn't say that, but it's almost this innate thing because we've known them for so long that they're almost speaking through you at this point, as opposed to you like really figuring it out. So it was a really interesting experience in that way.
Yeah, and I think like with going back to like editor's notes and stuff, like we didn't have a whole lot of feedback on what we could or couldn't do for Age of X-Men. They were kind of like, here's the characters, here's like, do whatever you want. And we had like pretty much ultimate freedom. There's a couple things in the pitching process when you're working out story where it's like, hey, I want this character to do this thing. And they're like, oh, well, that's a little bit of like a moral compromise for that character that we're not ready to see yet. So maybe let's not have that character do that. Maybe it could be this other person. But it's always in the form of a suggestion. It's never like, they can't do that, don't do that. It's more like, it comes down to, I think, everyone has a relationship with these characters, right? And you'd think that Marvel has these rules where it's like they can and cannot do these things, but what it mostly comes down to is you love the character a certain way, your editor loves the character a certain way, and can you sync those things up to tell the best story you possibly can? Because it comes down to like, you don't necessarily love, some people love the characters throughout time, but I think a lot of people love an era of the X-Men that they're very, very in love with. Like, there's the diehard Claremont fans, there's the diehard Morrison fans, and like Morrison rewrote a lot of these characters in interesting and new ways, and some people are like, that's my Magneto, or that's my Xavier, and all of them are equally valid, and it's nice to find that sort of like mix and match of what makes sense for everyone's sensibilities who are involved in telling this specific story. but it evolves every day, like mutants.
Well done. Well done. Let's talk favorite X-Men stories and why. Todd?
For me, it's Inferno. I love Inferno. I was
Wow.
in high school. I loved how Exterminators and New Mutants kind of had their story going, and then X-Men and X-Factor had their story going, and those two crossovers crossed over. They all built into this enormous story, and then it had crossovers into Avengers and Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. Power Pack had they were all dealing with the ramifications of hell coming to Earth, and inanimate objects becoming demonized, and they have to fight a demonic dump truck trying to eat people. It's like, it was so weird, so bizarre, and at age 17, that was just my jam. I loved it, and Excalibur showed up. They came over, to the U.S. for 2 issues to deal with it all.
Temporary visa to come and fight evil in the
Stopped
States.
at the border for a full
I
issue.
think X-Men are exempt from that. They just have Ilyana just pop them up wherever they need to be. So that's probably my favorite. The Mutant Massacre, Fall of Mutants, and Inferno. Those were my. I'm an '80s era kid, so that's my foundational X-Men era for sure. I guess whatever we start in on is our foundation and what we're gonna harken back to. But Inferno, got them in the omnibuses, love it. That's definitely my big fave.
Zach?
I'm a huge fan of God Loves, Man Kills. I think that story is like, it's not without its problems, but it's so brutal, and it's so, it shows you the power of what the X-Men can do as a metaphor in the face of like real world hate. And I know that it's difficult to do stories like that today in today's climate, but I would love the X-Men to go back to that like hard-hitting political stuff big time.
That's an incredible graphic novel.
It's so good.
Claremont at his peak with Brent Anderson doing amazing artwork.
Yeah, and it's uncompromising.
And the format too. Remember, I love those Marvel graphic novels.
Yeah, I wish they would bring them back. I'm like, please God, let us do.
They're both
graphic
good
novel.
choices. Lonnie, you got to match up with those two great choices now.
My favorite stuff is the Bill Sienkiewicz, Chris Claremont stuff on New Mutants, the Demon Bear stuff, and the introduction of Legion, and just what Sienkiewicz was doing at the time with art was something nobody had seen on superhero books before, and I think it really opened up the door to see how you could experiment and play with the format in new and interesting ways, and it completely complemented what Claremont was doing with these crazy stories. So those two were like super defining for me.
I remember the first time I saw a New Mutants issue was Sienkiewicz's art, and I was like, whoa, what's this? It took me a couple years to really appreciate it, and I've talked to other creators who said it took them, other artists who, when they were young, they couldn't really get it, and as they got into art and developing their style, they realized how great it was that he went and switched completely from what he was doing, which is an essentially Marvel house style, to all of a sudden this great experimental style.
Those comics terrified me as a child. 13 years old, I'd see them on the spinner rack at the grocery store. X-Men, cool. Spider-Man, oh, I can't even touch it. The cover, I had to spin the rack because I couldn't even look at it.
Who
It was
freaked you
so
out, Warlock?
terrifying.
Was it his Warlock?
No, it was the Demon Bear.
Demon Bear
and
cover's
I think the Slumber Party one. It was just so scary. I kind of remember one day I got brave enough just to peek a little bit. Oh, too scary. Find a copy of Booster Gold. Palette cleanser. Okay, I'm safe. I'm safe
That's your
now.
safe place. Booster Gold is your happy place.
But I love it now. I love it. Whole new appreciation as an adult. I'm not scared anymore. It's incredible stuff.
It's surprising and refreshing that not one of you chose one of the Claremont Byrne stories or Claremont Cockrum stories, which is fine because that's the thing. The X-Men have such a great history of storylines across history that you can cherry pick so many different ones from different eras. Inferno. I ask that question all the time to X-Men fans, and nobody ever says Inferno.
Yeah, Inferno's a deep cut. I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah.
And he had all the details down.
Oh, showed it to the
Ooh,
Power Pack.
read
I
it
was
like-
like, respect.
Power
Yeah.
Pack.
Yeah,
I read it like every 3 years. I
All
pull it
three
out
of
and
us.
reread it and
God, as
re-experience.
you're talking, they're both like Power Pack.
Oh, seriously, like I heard Power Pack and I was like, yes. Yeah.
It's a good book. Rereading Power Pack, those first 25, 30 issues are amazing.
That's for
Louise
Age
Simonson,
of X-Men 2.
Yeah,
That's for Age
Power,
of X-Men 2.
Age of Power Pack coming 2020.
I want in on that.
The definitive X-Men artist for each of you. Which is the guy that when you go to sleep and you have X-Men dreams, the art that you picture in your head?
Yeah, I think like I said before, because I was a 90s kid, that Jim Lee stuff is just permanently burned into my brain, and that's what I see when I go to sleep, so.
Frank Quitely. I like that new X-Men stuff blew my mind in a way that I was not prepared for, and I still revisit it a lot. I think I was falling out of comics for a while, and then that pulled me back in. Like, it grabbed me by the shirt and was like, "Get in here, motherfucker! Like, you're gonna read X-Men again."
Think of the children. Think of the
Oh,
children.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Bleep, bleep.
Bleep, bleep. Sorry.
I see a cute little one over there.
I'm very sorry. But yeah, it pulled me in, and it held me to a point where I was like, I had to pay attention. And Quitely's art is something that I'm like, I close my eyes and I'm like, that's my X-Men to me.
What was it specifically about that run that kind of changed your perception of the
I think
characters?
it's detailed to a point where very few superhero comics are to that level of detail. There's beautiful character work, and he introduced a lot of new characters that really felt weird and alive. Like Glob Herman is like I think one of the best creations. I love Beak and I love Basilisk, and Zorn's design I love. Like as it goes on, like you get all these weirdos, and it's like that's what the X-Men is to me, is like these weird oblong people who don't fit anywhere. And like that story of the remedial class with Zorn is like, I love it. I would read a whole book, like 200 issues of just that. Just sitting in a classroom with those characters talking, which I know no one wants, but I'll write it. Call me.
You have history with creating books that you think no one wants, and then you're completely wrong about it.
Yeah. It works out fine.
Todd, you're X-Men artist.
For me, it's Arthur Adams. His annuals, his X-Men annuals and X-Men specials, the detail he puts in his work, that blew my teenage mind. Became my biggest influence in pursuing my art. So I'd have to say, if I had to pick one, it's going to be Arthur Adams.
He also made Longshot look really, really cool,
yes,
right?
Longshot with Will Spertasio on inks. Amazing stuff, and the X-Babies. I'm a big X-Babies fan, so when Mojo World introduced the X-Babies, I thought,
Yeah, but
we
they
need
messed
more
up
of that.
Dazzler with that. That's the problem. That whole thing messed up Dazzler for years and years, and it always bugged me. I'm not one Dazzler fan. For defense, yeah, come on. It's a great, fascinating character, and I hope it shows up in Age of X-Man somewhere.
Dazzler is in Age of X-Men.
He's with Apocalypse and his love cult. I'm not even
ruining
kidding.
Dazzler for you.
Yeah, we've redesigned Apocalypse as a love hippie, and all he is love is good. He's preaching good love and free love for everyone, which I'm very surprised they were down with.
So Age of X-Men is going to sell a gazillion copies. It's going to make you guys uber stars. You're going to knock Donny Cates off of 5 of the 15 books he's doing. You're going to get your pick of things to do. You go back in and you pitch your dream book because C.B. Cebulski says, give me what you got, anything you got. You want to do another X-Men book. Who's the artist that you choose, and what's the general topic? Dream collaboration, go.
Let's take, so we're big fans of Colossus and Magic. One of the first things that we ever pitched to Marvel, and one of the things that we're still holding on to hope to get, is Colossus and Magic go back to Russia to confront like Baba Yaga and old sort of like Russian folklore. And we'll take Ian Bertram from Little Bird with us, and we'll make a book that everyone will talk about forever. That's the plan.
Todd, what's your dream X-Men collaboration? I know you already had it in a way with Chris Claremont.
Chris Claremont working with him on Nightcrawler was definitely a dream come true. And along that Nightcrawler vein, reintroducing Excalibur, get Kitty Pryde, get Rachel, get Captain Britain and Megan together, get the band back together. And I've actually, Jim Zub and I have talked about that. We're both Excalibur fans, and we both love to do an Excalibur book. So I think that would be a dream project I could see I'd like to do in the near future if it were possible.
The Dark Phoenix movie is coming out in June. I think we can all agree that the first time they tried adapting the Phoenix story to the screen, they kind of, screwed the pooch. What are you hoping they get right about it? What's the key to getting that story right on the big screen?
I think for me, it's just about the emotion between characters, like we've been talking about this whole time. The X-Men run off of this engine of interconnectivity and relationships and the emotions between characters. Their foundation is two people who were best friends who became worst enemies. And I think the Phoenix Saga, seeing their best become the thing they fear the most, and seeing how that really affects each member of the team is something that's really important. And from the looks of it, it seems like they got it right this time, but we will see.
Yeah, I think it comes down to Jean's emotional core. Like, if you care a lot about how Jean's being torn apart by the Phoenix, the movie's gonna resonate with you. But if you can't get that right, then you've lost me.
For me, it'd probably be a little less Mystique. I love Mystique, but I'd like to see a little less of her in the movies.
I think you're going to get your wish, judging from the trailer. Where
that's what I was going to say.
Confirms they killed her off. So
I don't watch movie trailers for
sorry.
Marvel movies. So.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay.
I just ruined it for you.
That's all right. Actually, it's good news for me. So.
Dream casting. You guys get to decide who plays Wolverine in the next film with Wolverine, and you decide yellow or brown costume.
I'm going to go with...
Enough of this jacket and jeans nonsense.
I'm going to go with the brown costume and Brendan Fraser.
I'm going to go with the yellow and blue and Shia LaBeouf.
Wow.
He's what the X-Men need.
Can you top this?
I'm terrible at casting, but if they can get a 5'3" guy, because for me, Wolverine should be 5'3", not 6 foot. I don't mind. I loved what Hugh Jackman did, but get a 5'3" guy in the brown and gold costume. I'm good.
We can't top that. I'm going to give you the win, though, for Shia LaBeouf. That's the best.
Thank you.
Dream casting. That was amazing. Honorable mention, Brendan Fraser. Lonnie Nadler, Zach Thompson, Todd Nauck, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Give it up, folks.
Thanks for coming.
And remember, Age of X-Men is out right now from Marvel. Hey, keep following all the fun here at Emerald City Comicon. Follow the hashtags ECCC and hashtag It's a Fan Thing. And coming up next year on the live stage, Skybound previews, the Teen Robot book, The Obsoletes with Simeon Mills.